I'm Dr. Richard Bolzakelli, lecturer in theology for Catholic Studies Academy. Today is Divine Mercy Sunday. It's the 8th day in the Easter octave. We see a story about this day in the Gospel of St. John. The disciples are locked in the upper room for the second Sunday in a row after Christ died on Good Friday. And Jesus appears to them a second time. He had appeared to them once before the Sunday of the actual resurrection. Thomas, of course, wasn't with them. And then when he returned, he did not believe what they had to report, that they had seen the risen Lord, that he stood there in their midst. And he insisted that he would not believe such a thing unless he could probe the wounds in Jesus' hands and see with his own eyes and hear Jesus' voice for himself. He simply wouldn't believe on the testimony of others what had been reported, that Jesus had triumphed over death. Now, I think that's what's really important about this particular Sunday, and maybe what helps us to understand why we could see it as a day of mercy, is that this is a day that bespeaks the triumph of life over death through the power of Jesus Christ. It radicalizes the witness given in the resurrection itself. Christ had risen from the dead. Thomas did not believe it. He didn't believe it because, for him, the evidence presented to him by the world was overwhelming. Every case that he ever knew about, now of course he seems to be forgetting what happened with Lazarus, but that's another story, I suppose. Death always wins. And I guess once Lazarus was raised from the dead, eventually he would die, right? So there was no permanent solution for Lazarus. I don't know how long Lazarus lived after the resurrection. But Jesus here rises from the dead, and the interesting thing is here that there wasn't anyone else who rose him from the dead. Jesus was the one with the power to do that, and now he died. It seemed as if death had finally won. This was too much. Death was victorious over life. Thomas couldn't see any other way. But, in fact, Jesus does come back, and he speaks the same words he had spoken before. It's like it happened all over again, or maybe again for the first time. He stands in their midst and he says, "Peace be with you." If he were speaking Hebrew, he would say, "Shalom." All's right with the world. All is as it should be. Now, this is interesting, right? Because this happens on the 8th day. Sunday is already kind of the 8th day. It's the first day of the week. We don't quite know that yet. Here, when we see the return of Christ, exactly a week later, a period of 8 days has passed, right? And this is what gives us the octave. It's like Hanukkah, when the oil was lit in the tabernacle lamp. They expected only a single day, but instead it didn't stop burning. It kept burning through 8 days. What this communicated was that God is always present in the midst of his people. He doesn't abandon them. 8, you see, is the number of eternity. It's the number of transcendence, of the passage of time. Transcendence, therefore, of the limitations of this world, of everything that's finite, that comes to be and passes away. Therefore, the 8th day indicates the triumph of life over death, of the unbounded over the bounded. And therefore the destruction of hell, what makes death powerful over human beings, that it definitively alienates us from one another, and from all the good things of the world. Here, when Jesus appears, not just on the day of the resurrection, once, as if he had momentarily escaped the strains of death, but on the eighth day, it shows that this triumph is permanent. He will never die. He's beyond death. And he draws us up into a new mode of existence, one immune from the power of death. Sure, the body can die, but in the end, life will win over death. Even our death won't last. What will last is the resurrection. Now, this is something that it is rather important for us to remember right about now. For the past month or so, we've really been obsessed with the idea of death, the fear of death. We've taken grave actions to avoid it, to minimize the untimely death of possibly millions of people around the world. We don't really know. We've been in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic, and we're trying to minimize its spread. So we've all kind of hunkered down, locked ourselves in the upper room for fear of the wrath of this great offender. Now, I'm not going to say that was the wrong thing to do. I don't know. But I will say that as we grow weary of this confinement and of this fear of this contagion, as we start to think that perhaps it's time to put it in its place, that sooner or later we will have put up a good enough fight, we can declare a tentative victory, at least for now, over this particular specter. What we should remember is that in the end, it has no power over us, not if we're Christian, because life will win over death. This life may come to an end. It may come to an untimely end. I don't know. But that won't last. What will last is eternal life.